Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Lucy Tassell.
I'm Zara Seidler.
Long-simmering tensions between Iran and Israel have broken into a full-scale exchange of hostilities following Israeli strikes on nuclear sites and military targets, including apartment buildings in Tehran. Iran responded with strikes on Tel Aviv, and the two nations have since launched waves of missiles and rockets at each other. In today's podcast, we'll explain the long history between these two countries, what's happened in the last few days, and why the US is involved.
Lucy, this is a really big story. It is dominating global headlines, and I think that there is a lot to unpack because there is a decades-long history between Israel and Iran, and this is just the latest outbreak of hostilities, as you mentioned earlier. But I do just want to start from the beginning. For someone that has seen the headlines but doesn't know much about the background, what do they need to know about this story?
Yeah, for sure. I think this is the case of a Cold War kind of heating up. The relationship between Israel and Iran has been hostile since the Iranian Revolution of 1979, which resulted in Iran becoming the world's first Islamic republic. Iranian leadership have since said their goal is to destroy Israel, the Jewish state. Iran financially and militarily supports a number of groups in the region, so Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the Houthis in Yemen, among others. All three groups are designated as terrorist organisations by Australia.
And I do think that that's an important note to focus on, because on this podcast, certainly many times before, we've spoken about the Israel and Hamas war that we've seen unfolding now for nearly 2 years in Gaza. And we're saying this is a different situation, and we're talking about now hostilities between two different groups, but Iran and Hamas have been linked, and Iran has certainly been financing and resourcing Hamas in Gaza.
Yes.
Yeah.
Another group that used to be part of Iran's kind of network of support in the region was the Syrian army. Now, that was under the old dictatorship under Bashar al-Assad, who, as we covered on this podcast, was deposed late last year. He fled to Russia. According to the Independent Institute for the Study of War, quote, Iran has conducted an extensive, expensive and integrated effort to keep President Bashar al-Assad in power as long as possible. Now, that was, of course, before he was deposed, but that kind of gives you a sense of Iran's involvement in the region. And certainly if you pulled up a map, Syria is in between Iran and Israel.
Okay, so just to recap, there has long been hostility between these two nations. Traditionally, they had fought through proxies, so not necessarily fighting against each other directly, but as we said, Iran supporting groups that have since gone on to engage in different wars with Israel.
Yeah.
However, last year we did see direct attacks for the first time. They didn't end up escalating as people expected them to, but then something fundamentally shifted last Friday, and for the first time we have almost now seen an all-out war between these two nations.
Yeah.
What happened on last Friday?
Israel said it carried out a wave of strikes on nuclear and military targets in Iran. Some of those military targets included residences of senior officials in Tehran, including apartment buildings, damaging these entire buildings, and Iran says killing civilians and the head of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which operates alongside the country's army. You might see it referred to as IRGC.
Yeah.
So taking out military senior officials, nuclear scientists, and Iran says also civilians. This was a significant attack, and by all reports one that Iranian intelligence did not see coming.
Hi, I'm Ola.
And I'm Elliot.
We're the two-person team behind everything video and audio here at the Daily Aus.
If you want to help us grow so we can deliver more of the content that you love, be sure to hit subscribe.
Now let's get back to the video.
So there have been global concerns about Iran's nuclear activities for some decades now, with several US administrations trying to strike deals to limit these activities. Last week, the UN nuclear watchdog issued a warning that Iran appeared to be using nuclear material for military purposes, not energy. That's in breach of a previous international agreement. Iran's official policy is that they are not pursuing a nuclear bomb, and nuclear research is solely for civilian purposes. Israel has long accused Iran of building up their nuclear capabilities, and then on Friday, one of the targets of Israel's initial attack was a nuclear site in Natanz. the nuclear watchdog from the UN has since confirmed there's been no increase in radiation. Now, all of this comes on top of efforts by US President Donald Trump to sign a new deal with Iran to limit its nuclear capabilities. He's imposed sanctions on the country to pressure it to negotiate. We've talked about before how sanctions are a tool that countries can use outside of military actions to express disapproval or to pressure a country to do something. A sixth round of negotiations towards that deal was due to take place on Sunday, but of course, as we know, it did not amid everything that has since happened.
Okay, so on Friday, there is this widespread attack. We see nuclear and military facilities targeted. We see the head of the IRGC targeted, nuclear scientists. It is essentially a significant step and an escalation in those hostilities between Israel and Iran.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people wondered what would come next, and people weren't left waiting very long because Iran retaliated almost immediately.
Yes.
What have we seen happen since that time?
So things are changing basically every 10 minutes, but the overall trends we can see and the basic facts have remained the same, which is that both sides are continuing to launch missiles at one another through the day and night. So Israel has a defense system called the Iron Dome. It's been intercepting some of those missiles, but some still are reaching Israel. As such, the death tolls in both countries are starting to climb. In Iran, at the time of recording, the country's health ministry reports that at least 220 people have been killed, both military officials and civilians. In Israel, again, at the time of recording, local health authorities report at least 13 people have been killed, all of whom have been identified as civilians. Those figures are changing rapidly, though. This is kind of a point-in-time update.
Yeah. And so we are seeing continuous missiles fired from both sides. It doesn't seem to be stopping at all.
Yeah.
One question, though, Lucy, that I have heard a lot of people asking is what is the role of the United States in this? Because you said earlier that Donald Trump was trying to negotiate a nuclear deal with Iran. So there's that connection there. But at the same time, the US is Israel's closest ally. What have we heard from the Trump administration?
So as I was saying before, ahead of the attack last Friday, Trump had told the world he was trying to reach a nuclear deal with Iran. It was one of the things he kind of came to office promising to do as soon as he could. The latest round of negotiations, as I said, were meant to be held. Iran then pulled out. Shortly after Israel launched an attack on Iran, Secretary of State Marco Rubio put out a statement saying the US was not involved in the strikes. However, since then, Trump has said the US, quote, knew everything in the lead up to Israel's strikes, and local media reports the US is helping Israel intercept Iran's missiles. More recently, he told reporters, quote, I hope there's going to be a deal. I think it's time for a deal and we'll see what happens. Sometimes they have to fight it out, but we're going to see what happens. And US media also reports that Trump learned of and vetoed a plan to assassinate Iran's supreme leader. At the time of recording, Israeli strikes have not targeted any political figures.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point because it does seem like there is a lot of emphasis on those military and nuclear related figures, and so far there has not been any targeting, at least not that Israel has announced, of political figures. So certainly something to keep an eye on. Now, Lucy, just to end with, I think a lot of people would be seeing what is happening and trying to understand from here on the other side of the world what this all means, and certainly how our government is viewing this situation. What have we heard from Australian political leadership?
So Australia's government has called for a de-escalation. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, he's currently in Canada for the G7 summit. He said he and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney had both discussed their desire to see a, quote, de-escalation of conflict. He said the two wanted to, quote, prioritise dialogue and diplomacy. He also repeated Australia's latest travel advice, which urges citizens not to travel to Israel or Iran.
Yeah, so clearly the Australian government, they're calling for de-escalation. The opposition in Australia, the coalition, they're suggesting that this rhetoric of de-escalation or looking for diplomatic engagement hasn't necessarily worked in the past, and they have suggested that there needs to be a new way of doing things to regulate that relationship between Iran and Israel. So certainly one to keep an eye on, but thank you for explaining all of that, Lucy.
Thanks, Zara.
And thank you for joining us for another episode of The Daily Aus. We will be back later today with the headlines, but until then, have a great day.